For those of you who followed the Paris Accords, you will have seen that it was up to islands to keep 1.5 degrees on the table. So today's panel is full of extraordinary innovators who are doing absolutely amazing things on their own islands and also having a global impact. So today we're going to look at the intersect of ancient wisdom, indigenous wisdom, and innovation. And we're just waiting for a last... I'm going to introduce briefly each of the speakers while Brynn joins us. So on the far right, from New Zealand, absolutely delighted to have so many of our fellow countrymen here with me today, and really somebody that we call a taonga, or a national treasure. A taonga in Māori is Anake Goodall, who has played an incredible role in New Zealand. I'll introduce him in more depth when he comes to speak. And sitting next to him, Dr. Austin Shelton, who's the director of the University of Guam Centre for Island Sustainability. In the middle, Henk Rogers, who is a tech guru and global entrepreneur. And next to Henk, Brynn Foster, who's the founder and CEO of Voyaging Foods. And to her right, John Bailey, whose delicious cloud coffee you have been enjoying every morning. So a wonderful group, and Anake will do a formal welcome on behalf of all of us.
Kai runga, tēnā koutou. Mihi ana mātou, kia koutou e tau nei I tēnei ata, kai rungi te kaupapa o te wā nei. Nei rā nā mihi o mātou nei maunga tūpuna, kia koutou maunga tūpuna. E tēnō mihi ki ngā iwi shoshone, nā tangata whenua I nei whenua tāhua. We just start in the first language of Aotearoa New Zealand, in the Māori language, carrying the greetings of our ancestral mountains and acknowledging each of your ancestral mountains, your histories, your lands, and we bring a particular greeting to the Shoshone people, the traditional owners, customary stewards of this landscape and the providers and their generosity of the cultural authenticity for our conversations in the Mandala today. He whakaaro anō kia rātou kua wihi ai ki te pō, haere atu, tātou te honga ora, tēnā nō tātou. And we just stop for a moment to remember all our forebears, those that carved the path that we all travel on, those who've gone. We stop, we shed a tear, we farewell them, and in doing so we return back to the space that we're in, to the work before us, and with that, welcome.
And from another part of Polynesia, now my island home, Hawaii, I ka wā mamua, ka wā mahope. We look to the past as a guide to the future. So Anake, you are so many things in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The chair of the Hillary Institute, you've been very involved with Ngāi Tahu, the Treaty of Waitangi settlements, which sparked significant shifts in both race relations in New Zealand, but also a transformation to a sustainable economic model, which is now around 20% of New Zealand's GDP, or some $50 billion. You were also one of the founding members of the EPA in New Zealand, the Environment Protection Agency. So Anake is really one of our elders, even though he's a young elder, and is somebody who really personifies this melding of indigenous wisdom and economic sustainability. So he's going to take us through some of the history of what has been nothing less than a social and environmental revolution in New Zealand over the last 40 years.
Kia ora, Amanda. This is a big subject. I'm just going to flick through a few slides at obscene pace, so forgive me for that. I'm more than happy to discuss anything at all afterwards. My gig, really, my jam is I'm interested in community self-determination. You can define that lots of ways, and I've had roles in this sense lots of ways, but particularly in recent years in the Indigenous issues reconciliation space. This first slide is sort of classic colonisation, really, right? So there's a settler society arrives, there are treaties, It's not too long, though, before armed militia are acquiring the lands, the resources of those that have been visited, and the forceful removal of those estates. And then quite powerfully, the introduction of new farming systems, new systems of government, new concepts of economy, new religions, of course. And in about 1 or 2 generations, the original owners are already literally starving on small reservations. It's a harsh story, it's a very familiar one, and really it's wash, rinse, repeat, right? You just do this again and again. I'm in awe, it's enormously effective technology. I've put the British flag in the centre here because they're the main players in New Zealand and obviously a powerful force here. But you think back to the time, you can pop any European flag in there at the time, and this is a phenomenon that really set up a lot of our advanced societies today, the first world. And if you don't mind me saying so, I think probably most of us here are enjoying the privilege of this mechanism because our society, to greater and lesser degrees, are largely subsidised by those who provided land, resources and labour for free against their wishes. Okay, so there's a big broad landscape. If you jump right into, let's say, 1980 plus or minus, ILO 169 recognises Indigenous rights. There's a whole suite globally. A move to reconciliation processes in places as unlikely as South Africa and Australia and New Zealand. The tribal group that I was in service to for some 30 years settled a 6th-generation grievance claim in 1998 for about $200 million, 1 cent in the dollar of provable loss. And it's really interesting. There's a little bit of financial capital, but there's a bow wave effect here that all of a sudden, how do you manage this money? How would you govern it? What would you invest it in? What would you invest in distribution? Would you want to address health issues in your community? And it's actually that structuring and the skills to manage these resources that have really mobilised or catalysed a development across a whole lot of dimensions. I don't spend time on this. 16% of the New Zealand population are Māori, about the same representation in the legislature, means that Acts of Parliament increasingly recognise Māori rights, and all sorts of cultural indicators, including especially language, really strong. There's a real resurgence of strength in these communities, a lot of vitality. This is all great, right? It's very encouraging. We're 20, 30 years in, and at the same time, the settlers' own model is blowing up, right? We know this idea that everything's at our human disposal and we're just going to throw technology around unbounded and we're blowing up the mothership. This slide interests me. The street art references Einstein's observation that if the bees go, humans go within 3 years. The very sobering picture at the bottom is people in China this year pollinating fruit trees by hand because there aren't enough insect pollinators. So just in case we're getting too comfy with progress to date. And I want to end here very quickly. A few book reviews, really. Dark Emus, written by an Aboriginal Australian. It's short, it's like a 4-hour audio book. Listen, I really recommend it. It's really quite provocative. And it just talks about a 60,000-year-old civilization that the Aboriginal Australians are the longest-running civilization on the planet by a long margin. All sorts of amazing technologies, aquaculture, horticulture, agriculture, baking bread 15,000 years before the Egyptians. The European settlers arrived and walked straight past that and say, we don't see any cathedrals or stained glass windows here. These guys are obviously savages. Thank goodness we arrived with our technologies. And the point I want to make is I think there's a real risk of hubris. We know best. We know that our algorithms work or our economic systems are the correct ones or our ways of thinking about energy are correct, and there's a real risk that we miss a lot of value that we increasingly need to connect to. And in my view, the Indigenous stories have a lot to inform us here. I think there's a lot of reasons to be humble about now. My reaching hands, I think those that have a responsibility to reach out to those that haven't, particularly where those that have got it off the backs of those who have now been dispossessed. I think it's morally correct. I think it's important for the healing of the victims, if you will, but I think it's important for the healing of the victor as well, to go back to that idea of healing and need to find some humility. And I'll put a frame around that picture because I think all of our efforts are for naught unless we can re-establish a frame that puts community collective well-being above individual interests, and we've really got to return that table. I'm at a time, I want to refer to 2 books. I think Brynn Brown's Dare to Lead, it feels like a manual for the time really. We need to find real courage to have genuinely hard conversations about the issues that matter with an open heart. And I reference Charles Eisenstein here, who I think does a great job of saying we don't have a climate change problem, we don't have a carbon intensity problem, we have a relationship problem. A relationship with ourselves, a relationship with each other, and a relationship with all nature in the biosphere. And I think that's the real work of the time. It's a privilege to be on the journey with you all.
Thank you, Anake. Now we're going to move from Polynesia to Micronesia, and Dr. Austin Shelton is going to tell us a little of the story of Guam and a little of how he is working with Hawaii. Austin is now leading an initiative called Guam Green Growth, which picks up on Anake's point about relationship and how is it that we all come together collectively. In Hawaii, we are the first local 2030 United Nations hub for islands. So how is it that we are coalescing around the Sustainable Development Goals as a community? And in Hawaii, we have the governor, the 4 mayors, all of the key CEOs, and the key leaders in civil society. So over 100 partners have come together in community, in collaboration, and Austin is now working with us to lead a similar initiative in Guam. So very exciting. Over to you, Austin.
Thank you, Amanda. Hafade Mananas Izuas, hello and good morning. My name is Austin, and as Amanda mentioned, I work in the Center for Island Sustainability at the University of Guam. First, I just want to show you where Guam is, that little red arrow. And so this area in Micronesia, we have lots of different cultures and actually 2,100 islands spread across 2.9 million square miles. And there's about 500,000 people in this region. And so we're about 7.5 hours away from Honolulu, right on the other side of the Pacific, and about 3.5 hours away from Tokyo. And to give you an idea of the size, I just wanted to lay over the continental US. This is the area of ocean that we live in. So we have a 4,000-year history in the island of Guam. The first people arrived likely from Southeast Asia. And we still practice a lot of these traditional, we have a lot of these traditional practices in place still. And we also have a rich history of colonization, similar to what Anake was sharing. Magellan landed in Guam in the 1500s. We were a Spanish colony. In 1898, we became an American colony. And during World War II, we actually became, there was a Japanese occupation, and people were put into concentration camps for a few years. And just this past Sunday, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Liberation Day when Americans came back. But we have a large movement for self-determination because we were never given that opportunity to think about, do we want independence? Do we want statehood? Do we want free association? And so those are the things that our people are working through right now. We have a lot of climate change impacts affecting us now, like increasing frequency and intensity of storms. NOAA said that this super typhoon from 2018 to hit our region, Typhoon U2, was the strongest storm ever to hit US soil. And people are still recovering from this today. So it was only in the news for a couple of days in the US, but it's still a large problem for our region. We have rising sea levels, and we can have over 24-hour periods where the streets are flooded like this in some of our lower-lying atolls in Micronesia and the Marshall Islands. We have coral bleaching problems where the sea surface temperature is rising and causing the little plant cells to escape from, or be ejected from our corals. And so our center is working since 2009 to lead and support the transition of our island region toward a sustainable future. And so we have a lot of ongoing projects, traditional navigation and climate change adaptation courses, food security work. We even have sea turtle biologists. We're working to reduce our waste, our plastic waste, studying our native forests, building capacity through STEM work and science fairs for our high school students. But I just want to hone in on a couple innovations real quick. One of the things that we're doing is working on watersheds and coral reefs. So this is what this is Fua Bay, the site where our ancestors tell us that civilization began. The first human beings sprang forth from this rock. This is what it looks like on a nice sunny day. But after heavy rain events, we have thousands of tons of sediment flowing into that bay. And so that smothers and kills our coral reefs. And we're looking for ways to seal up these badland areas to stop the bleeding of our island into the ocean. And the reason we're working on this is because in order to build resilience against the global climate change impacts, we need to fix some of the local environmental stressors so that the natural ecosystem functions can come back and will be resilient to these climate change impacts. So we have local stressors like fires that are started by deer poachers that burn hillsides in order to make it easier for them to catch deer. We have native solutions like throwing these seed sling stones that we used to use them for warfare or protection, and now we're putting seeds in them to reforest some of these areas. And we're also trying drone technology. The drone is being fabricated right now, but it would take several lifetimes to hike up the mountains and plant, so we're trying to do something a little quicker to get reforestation done. And then as Amanda was mentioning, we are working with Kamehameha Schools, a business accelerator called Mana Up in Hawaii with our own business incubator, Guma, and we're working on waste reduction. You know, there's only so many holes that you can dig in islands and fill up with trash before we run out of space. Right now, we depend on 32,000 containers of imports every year to meet our needs. So that's because we're focused on this linear economy, and so we really like this concept of the circular economy. And this is something that was already traditional or ancient knowledge that we need to figure out again in the island context for Guam. And this is what we're doing with Guam Green Growth. We're trying to add to the current economic drivers, which are tourism, 1.5 million tourists a year, and military and government spending. So circular economy things in the island context are taking waste products and turning it into a new industry. So we have these vegan leather wallets made out of banana fiber. After you harvest the bananas, you have to cut down the tree and throw it away. And so this company now has 40 employees working in a factory making products like this. There's also things that you can do with palm leaves, turning them into plates, bamboo products, turning them into furniture. And so we're going to be working with the Makerspace and Business Incubator to make these things happen. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Austin. It's so exciting to see the innovation that's coming out. And just a quickie, the World Bank estimates there'll be 200 million climate refugees by 2050 if we don't do something about it. So you really can see from the visuals how the impact is so real in islands already. Henk Rogers, global tech guru, and has been a real driving force for innovation in Hawaii. There's so many things I could say about him, but the thing that really struck me was how he has managed to persuade the legislature to commit to 100% renewable energy in Hawaii. It has transformed the way people are operating. We now have the second highest EV penetration after California, and we have the highest penetration of rooftop solar in single-family homes in Hawaii. So Henk says it much better than I do. Henk, please tell us your story.
Yes, so I've lived in Hawaii now for 17 years. My background is I was a computer game developer. You may know me for a little game called Tetris. How many of you played Tetris out there? I'm really sorry about that. But in 2005, I sold a company, a mobile phone game company. A month later, I found myself in the back of an ambulance on the way to a hospital with 100% blockage of the widowmaker. That's the biggest artery in your heart. First thing I thought was like, you got to be kidding me. I haven't spent any of the money yet. And the second thing I thought was, no, I'm not going. I still have stuff to do. And so I kind of worked it backwards from at the end of my life. What was it that was going to upset me if I didn't do something about it during my lifetime? And I found my missions in life. First mission came to me in the back of a newspaper. I was still in the recovery room, and it said, oh, by the way, we're going to kill all the coral in the world by the end of the century. And I'm going, you idiots, you can't do that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's the basis of the food chain in the ocean. And we're, you know, the coral is like the canary in the coal mine. What about the plankton? You're talking about collapsing the entire food chain. So I founded the Blue Planet Foundation, and my little 7-year-old niece, who's better at me explaining it, is going to tell you about the Blue Planet Foundation, I think. Do I have to push it again?
Hawaii is our home. But our home is changing.
Breaking news on Kauai tonight, devastating flooding.
Widespread damage, homes on the verge of collapsing.
The world is changing.
The largest wildfires in the state of California.
Tonight, the rain is over, but the disaster is not.
I worry sometimes when I think about my future. What will it be like when I grow up? Would it be like what my parents remember? Climate change scares me. But we know that it doesn't have to be this way. We can change. That's why I'm grateful for Blue Planet Foundation. For the past 10 years, Blue Planet has been leading the way for clean energy. They think if we can do it in Hawaii, we can show the entire world what a clean energy future looks like. They brought together hundreds of students just like me to be a part of the change.
All right, now everybody get your signs. Everybody get together. Make your voice heard. Make your future happen.
They joined their families and neighbors to draw the line on climate change.
Our voices really matter, and us being here today is showing something and showcasing to the world that we really care about this issue and we want to take a stand.
And in 2015, their efforts paid off when Hawaii passed our country's first 100% renewable energy law. It's nice to know when I grow up, all our energy will come from clean sources. And now Blue Planet is growing. The Repower Project is working to bring Hawaii's 100% renewable energy law to other states. Now Blue Planet is active every day, making this change happen. They are in our classrooms and in our communities. We still have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do. I'm excited about the new future we are creating. We can help solve our climate crisis, starting in Hawaii, and we'll inspire the world. But we can't do it alone. Will you help? For my future.
Mia, 7 years old. She practiced for 8 hours. She remembers all those lines. She's going to be an actress someday. Hawaii spends $5 billion a year on oil. That's 1.5 million people spending $5 billion a year on oil. It means that we have lower salaries and higher rents. It's taxation without representation, and what do we get for it? We get climate change, we get sea level rise. So why isn't Hawaii already 100%? We've got the best solar in the country, meaning we're the southernmost state in the country. We've got great wind. We've got trade winds, which means 95% of the time we have very strong wind coming from the same direction. And we have geothermal. The estimates are that we have enough geothermal underneath the big island of Hawaii to power all of Hawaii for the rest of time. So why aren't we already there? And the answer is that the electric company is fairly comfortable, has been fairly comfortable in its 10% on top of the price of oil business model. So after we passed the mandate, the electric company finally took a look at what's their business model, and they came back and they said, you know what, we figured it out. We can actually do this by 2040, 100% by 2040. Where the hell were you guys? You know, I mean, why does it take us, you know, a guy from the computer game industry to pass a mandate so you actually look at the business model? We did a calculation that's going to save ratepayers $7 billion, you know, between now and 2040. We have no excuse. Islands I think all islands are pretty much in the same boat. We import our fossil fuel for energy, and we should be doing everything to use local renewable resources. So now we're helping other states and other islands and hopefully the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henk, and thank you for living your philosophy too. Henk has been off-grid both at his ranch on the Big Island and at his home for 5 years, and it's really inspiring to see it. I have solar panels and I have an electric vehicle thanks to this kind of role model, so hopefully lots more will follow suit. Now we have 2 innovators in the field of sustainable agriculture, and there'll be another panel going into this in more depth afterwards, but we're going to give you a little taste with Brynn Foster, who is the founder and CEO of Voyaging Foods. She is also part Indigenous Hawaiian and part Indigenous or Native American, and she has really revolutionized canoe plants and using those as a movement for food sovereignty, which is fascinating. She will tell you more. And from my point of view, you all know I'm passionate about women's empowerment. She is the president of the Hawaii Farmers Union, North Shore Co-op, leading the first ever all-women executive, and she is part of the US Grassroots Accelerator for Women Environmental Leaders. So, Brynn, tell us a little bit about your idea and where you're taking it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me? Aloha, my name is Brynn Foster, and I'm the founder of Voyaging Foods. Voyaging Foods is a bakehouse and miller of native Hawaiian canoe plants. So we make alternative flour from these canoe plants. And I don't know if anyone have heard of canoe plants. Do you know what canoe plants are? Anyone? Yeah, Hawaii. Canoe plants were the plants that the Polynesians brought on their open ocean voyaging canoes. The hokulea is the modern day, which is my purse from the hokulea, which I can tell you later. They brought these plants on their canoes when they came to Hawaii thousands and thousands of years ago on purpose. And these plants were similar to like the emergency kit because they were everything from food, medicine, they built their homes from them. And so these plants are so important and they're underutilized. So I have really come to reclaim our food sovereignty with these plants in mind. I'm the first in 3 generations of my family to raise their family knowing their culture, which is Native Hawaiian, and I take it very seriously because I love it, and I'm just reclaiming, which I think a lot of Indigenous, Native people are trying to do now. So I started Voyaging Foods because I wanted something healthier for my family to eat. Taro powder, which I brought my taro powder right here. I was gluten-free. I wanted to raise my children with a gluten-free option because we have a family history of allergies. And I started to make a teething biscuit using taro powder because we feed poi to our babies as a first food in Hawaii. And I was thinking, well, my son starts to teeth. I can't imagine feeding him something from potato, rice, wheat that I don't know how it was grown. All of those things were very important to me. So I decided to make my own teething biscuit and dehydrate my own poi into a flour. And so that's how Voyaging Foods really got started, the idea. And then I saw my mom kind of stealing my teething biscuits. So I thought, I need to share this with the world. This is too good just to keep in my own family. We are now in Whole Foods around Hawaii. We're in Neiman Marcus, Dean and DeLuca, a lot of these stores that never have really carried taro flour before. And I hope to share it with the world. We're creating a regenerative, value-added system in Hawaii so that there's a lot of different people making taro flour. I didn't invent it. It was a subsidy that King Kalakaua, our last king of Hawaii, promoted for Hawaii in the 1800s, and it was an export to the world, actually, as a food that helped save a lot of failure to thrive babies that couldn't eat anything else. So this food is definitely, the canoe plants are something that the world needs to consume, and also for Hawaii, we need to plant and grow more of our indigenous varieties for healthy biodiversity and regenerative agriculture, which I believe is the base for what our future is. So food sovereignty, we're reclaiming our food sovereignty. In Hawaii, it's a big movement. I'm not the only one, so we're collaborating with people like the Hawaii Ulu Cooperative, which is a combined over 70 small family farmers. And we're
Ulu is breadfruit.
Breadfruit, yes, and kalo is taro. And so we're very excited about our future because it's inclusive. And so I'm just excited about it.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to hear the story of a previous Thomson Reuters executive who now also running the family farm and creating this beautiful cloud coffee that you've been able to enjoy every day. So John Bailey, over to you.
Aloha, I'm John Bailey, and I'm a co-founder of Hawaiian Cloud Forest Coffee, and I hope you all had your coffee this morning and got woken up. This is the story of two couples who joined together to create a 100-acre organic coffee farm, 2,800 feet up on the windward wet side of the north slope of Mauna Kea on the Big Island. And I'm going to take you there and show you. That's what we want it to look like. And now we're going to take you on a visit there for 2 minutes. Hawaiian Cloud Forest coffee is grown high on the lush, verdant slopes of Mauna Kea, overlooking the Hamakua coast on the Big Island of Hawaii. For years, the best-known Hawaiian coffee has come from the Kona district of the Big Island. But best known and best aren't necessarily always synonymous. For more than a decade, Eric and Hillary Gunther have been steadily working towards producing organic shade-grown coffee on the Hamakua coast, where climate and conditions have been proven excellent for producing a world-class cup of coffee, Hawaiian Cloud Forest coffee. Before the first people arrived on the Big Island, the land on which the Hawaiian Cloud Forest coffee farm now sits was quite likely a climax forest, a community of plants that will eventually grow and remain dominant when human activity is absent. These trees would have included koa, ohia, and other indigenous Hawaiian trees. Thomas Edison has been quoted as having said, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." Nowhere is this more true than with farming. When Eric and Hillary first purchased the property on which the Hawaiian Cloud Forest coffee farm now sits, and envisioned the paradise they hoped it would become, the reality was that after centuries of human use, the land looked nothing like it did when it was an untouched climax forest. Eventually, with all of the valuable hardwoods having been harvested, the land was left best suited for grazing cattle. When the Gunthers took ownership of this property, as you can see from this early photo, it was a mixture of grassland and scrub brush, mainly guava. It has taken a lot of effort to clear the land and gradually realize their vision for and commitment to creating a sustainable organic farm. Longtime residents of Hawaii, the Gunthers have developed an intimate knowledge of the land based on years of observation and applied knowledge. So our story started when Eric and myself formed a partnership with our wives, and by the middle of 1980s, we had assembled 25 acres of mostly treeless and overgrazed cattle pasture, as you can see. At the time, we had no particular plan to farm it, but then by the end of the 80s, Eric and I took a hike, and we hiked from sea level to the top of Mauna Kea. Took us 3 days to get up there, and we passed through every possible ecosystem. But we saw it was our aha moment because we realized that the Big Island was facing environmental destruction. And we saw this when we passed, first we passed sugarcane fields being burnt as part of the harvest process. We passed a smoke belching sugar mill surrounded by a tropical rainforest. We we passed through a forest of eucalyptus trees, soon to be clear-cut and exported to Asia. We passed miles and miles of treeless and eroding, because it was treeless, it was eroding cow pasture until we got to the top of the mountain. That was our aha moment, and that's when we began to explore growing quality organic coffee and we had two goals. Our goal was to create a sustainable farm, but one of our major goals was to regenerate our soil. This is Mauna Kea as it would have been seen by the first Hawaiians as they arrived. This is what it looked like when we found this land. That's yours truly. But we hired a Kona coffee consultant to help develop our business plan, and his bottom line basically was that we could expect a yield of 1,000 pounds of roasted coffee per acre, and he said we could sell it for about $20 a pound. So that was $20,000 an acre. We rushed out and bought 75 more acres because it only cost us $5,000 an acre for that. So then we were on our way, and we created this new farm, and we have on the same land, and we have since planted 25,000 coffee trees because now we had 100 acres, but we could plant about 50 of it because we had to use some of it for ponds, et cetera, for other infrastructure. But we also developed a regenerative agriculture, let's call it Regen Ag plan. And that means we wanted to enrich our soil, and we had to improve our watershed, and we had to enhance our biodiversity. And all of that, our ultimate goal was to capture the carbon in the atmosphere and put it back into the land. And so part of that plan was that number one, we would not use Roundup to kill the weeds in the grass. We mow instead and use the clippings to decompose underneath the trees. We also use the waste pulp from the milling process and put that back in the soil. We also have a plan of stumping and chipping the trees every 4th year, and that means all the chips could also be decomposed, could be put back under the trees and decomposed. All building our soil. Our watershed, we got lucky. We made a deal with Ducks Unlimited, and they put a pig fence around our entire 100 acres and built 10 ponds. That meant all of the water running off would run into the ponds and the pigs would not create an environmental hazard by digging in our soil. And we also use free-range chickens and beehives to enrich the soil and the plant life. But our biggest step was the biodiversity step, and that's where we added koa trees. Eric developed a plan to plant koa trees as a shade tree amongst the coffee trees in every 3rd row. And everybody knows, the coffee aficionados know that coffee grown as an understory under a shade tree has more tasty beans. It tastes better. So koa trees are also nitrogen enhancers, and that's very important for an organic farm because it puts nitrogen into the soil. They're extremely valuable trees, and you can get 300 board feet out of a mature tree. And by the price of koa right now at $25 to $100 per board foot, you can get $9,000 out of a mature koa tree, and we have already planted 6,000 trees and plan to plant 6,000 koa trees and plan to plant even more. Our final step in building our sustainable farm is that we were off-grid, so we had to build our own power system. And Henk will appreciate this, is that we built our own solar system, solar power electric generating system. We have 104 solar panels. We have 32 deep cycle batteries. Some of them we get from the Navy, they're Nautilus submarine batteries that we get recycled because they only use them for a year, but we can use them for another 20 years. And we have a water catchment system. We don't have an electric meter. We don't have a water meter. We planted over 36,000 trees in 20 years. And our model is a model for
coffee farmers in Hawaii, but worldwide. Most coffee producing countries are in the third world, and they can use, our plan is to use reforestation rather than deforestation, because we have planted almost as many other trees besides the coffee trees on our 100 acres. So we feel that our coffee customers, they help us, and we help them by sending them a pound of coffee a month.
Fantastic. John has really begun our final round by telling you how his doing the right thing, which is also the smart thing, can help be a model for other coffee farms around the world. So I'm going to ask each of the others, finishing with Anake, what it is that they are doing in Hawaii that can be a model for others. And Brynn, I have a very specific question for you. I wanted to share with you all that Brynn was a finalist in the Global We Empower United Nations SDG Challenge, which the Secretary General himself launched last year at the UN. And Brynn was a finalist, a global finalist this year. So I wanted to ask you, what is it about the innovation that women entrepreneurs, particularly Indigenous women entrepreneurs like you, can bring in terms of taking the local global by way of example?
Thank you for that. I feel lucky in a way, or fortunate in a way, that I don't really have to recreate it. I'm just reclaiming what our ancestors, even if you didn't know them personally, it's there. It's in the language, it's walking the land, it's putting your hands in the soil, which is what I have been doing in the past few years and reacquainting myself with that. And so I believe that for Islands of Innovation, for women leadership, it starts with nurturing your family, then nurturing your community. And how do you do that? I started with a product, but it really is so much more than a product, because you have to think about the supply chain. And if you want to have a product from Hawaii, there's only so much land, so many things, so you really have to build that system, and you have to work in collaboration. And so that's sort of where I see being able to create a model to go global, is to really, work hard in your region and your community to create these models that you can take them other places. In Hawaii, our value-added food system is really non-existent. There isn't any manufacturing facilities that are focused especially on making flour, or so what I do. So I purchased the mills, and we just built a solar dehydration system, which runs off of clean energy. We don't even need any solar panels at this point, because it's getting to a high enough level. So we have a provisional patent on that we want to share with just our Hawaii farmers. So that will be a free and open source for them. And then we'll be able to recreate this in other Indigenous communities, which is where I would like to take this after Hawaii. And then we've created an app also that connects to our value-added solar dehydration system, so that they can be given to our rural farmers. So we don't have to have a centralized system, but we can employ this empowerment tools for our farmers in rural areas. And this can happen on the reservations. It can happen in other indigenous communities in the United States, because I feel like those are places that really need to be, we need to focus in the United States to help our indigenous communities here. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, Brynn, you have brought some of your product. Mm-hmm. So we have a little quiz for the audience. And this is a question. There are subsidies to fossil fuel companies. In 2015, we have extra permission from Amy to do 2 more minutes, so we're just going to finish up. So in 2015, when the Paris Accords were negotiated, the IMF has now documented the amount of money that was spent on fossil fuel subsidies. And Brynn is going to hold up some of her beautiful product. Whoever gets the closest to this number, and you're not allowed to answer because I know Mike Rogers, you know this answer, will win some of Brynn's fabulous canoe plant products. Can anyone guess what the amount of money spent on fossil fuel subsidies was in 2015 when we were negotiating the Paris Accords? Globally. Give me a wild guess. 2 trillion and up. Anyone have an advance on 2 trillion?
5.2 trillion.
5.2, you're very close, a little up further.
7 trillion.
No, 5.2, we're in the zone. 5.2, 5.2, 5.3, a little up, we're getting very, very close. 5.4, could the lady in the white shawl please come down and accept her prize? Thank you very much. And interestingly, a third, so you can see the total disconnect here. Now, interestingly, a third of global emissions, of course, come from transport. And so the work that Henk is doing with renewable energy is really critical. Also, how do we build back better after these incredible disasters? And Henk, I'd like you to tell us a little about the innovative work you're doing with the Red Cross in Puerto Rico to build back better. And I'd like you to tell us about the new global initiative, which all of us are going to join to help save the planet.
That's more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
So in Puerto Rico, we're helping 125 schools with their disaster relief efforts. The idea is that schools failed because there was no power after the power outage. We're adding batteries and solar panels to all of the schools so they can have food and shelter. What I'm doing with Martin, actually, Martin is not here today, but I had the opportunity to speak at the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, and I worked together with the small island developing states, so all the small islands that are drowning, we all worked together and got climate change to be declared an emergency. That gave me the idea that gave me the idea that I could, or we could, have an effect on countries, because IPU is 178 countries. So our next plan is to create a new alliance, an alliance of NGOs, and we're going to work in and through the United Nations, and we're going to flip countries the way we flipped states and the way we flipped Hawaii. First comes the mandate. Once the mandate's in place, then all the companies and all the people in your jurisdiction can think about how are we going to do this, and then it actually gets done.
Fantastic, thank you. And Austin, I believe you have an invitation to issue to us all for next year.
Yes, please. I'm really happy to be here at Sun Valley and learning a lot from this forum. We also have a regional conference on island sustainability that we host at the University of Guam each year. I'd like to invite all of you to be there, March 30th through April 2nd, 2020. And our theme will be Island Wisdom for a Global Future. So we have a past as a sustainable society that we want to take lessons from to move us toward a sustainable future and blend those with modern technologies. So I hope that a lot of the speakers here and the audience can be part of that conversation as well.
Fantastic. And Anake, you have the closing word.
Well, thank you very much. Very quickly, I think early stage evidence from our country would be that it is possible to change narrative at a national level, where a majority of the population can realise the value that's carried by minorities and the smaller groups, and that can inform the trajectory of a whole country and change the way that we view the potential for the future. So I think there's evidence that it's worth investing in this space because we can do this.
Thank you to an amazing panel, Indigenous Wisdom and Sustainable Futures. Big round of applause, please.